Hello there, and welcome to Season 15, Episode 23 of the Bitcoin Takeover Podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is someone who has been on the show 3 or 4 times before, but the last participation that he had on the show was during the Christmas of 2020, when we did an interview where we discussed all sorts of stuff about music and video games, and he introduced me to a few bands. But nowadays he's the CEO of Synonym, and that keeps him busy. And it's really interesting how being the CEO of this company has helped him evolve as a Bitcoiner and adjust some of the views that he previously held. It's really good to have you, John. This is, I think, your fourth or fifth time on the show, and it's been a while.
Well, thanks for having me back.
So, what's new at Synonym? I remember reporting back in early 2020 or 2021, I'm not sure. These 2 years are still mixed in my head about the launch of the company. It promised to create this atomic economy. It was operating on the Omni layer of Bitcoin, which I guess was still maintained at the time. But since then, there were some major changes in the product, in the philosophy of the company, and it's not quite the same.
I would add some nuance there. What the company hasn't changed that much in the regards that you mentioned, as far as what our interests are in atomic economy and trying to build out that concept. Also, we weren't on Omni so much as uh, researching whether we were going to support it in our products. And we did put time into that, and we did demonstrate, for example, the first Tether transaction, quote unquote, on Lightning using Omnibolt. And then a month later, we dropped the whole thing. Basically, I don't know if you want the details on that too, but yeah, that's some nuance there. What's
What
new at
about
Cinnamon? I guess was another part of the question. Do you want me to get into that too?
you can go ahead. I think it's
Okay.
interesting to a lot of people. I mean,
What's
your
new?
experiences and findings. At one point, you even started the Biz podcast for the sake of sharing some insights on how you're running the business. And I don't think you explained too much about the idea of using Omni, which used to be called Mastercoin. It was the world's first ICO, and then it became the layer where Tether was launched, USDT.
Well, the interesting thing about Omni was that it was just a very simple way to do tokens on Bitcoin. It was where Tether was born in the first place. The As far as the ICO, I actually think that came a little bit after they, in other words, the ICO thing became a thing. I don't remember when it happened, but the token was not actually integral to the protocol at all. And so I just saw it as, all right, this is a practical way that we can do a Bitcoin friendly or a Bitcoin compatible way of doing tokens, because I feel that you do need some way to express credit, and business issued credit, particularly in the post Bitcoin economy. But yeah, I just didn't want to bootstrap that whole thing. As far as well, rebootstrap, I should say, revive it, because it was starting to get deprecated and removed from exchanges, and it just seemed like a bad idea right in the middle of where, like, Lightning Labs was raising 70 million or whatever it was, so they could build, tokens on Lightning again. And so at that point, I was just like, nah, I'm not going to fight that fight. I know what it's like trying to convince people to do something that is not the hype thing. As far as what's changed and what's new at Synonym, well, what's new, we're about 19 people now. We just hired a couple, and have been in like pseudo stealth mode for the past 6+ months. Um, with BitKit, we're currently doing an audit on it to prepare for coming out of beta to actually formally release the app. Not really a lot of new features in the past 6 months or so, just trying to get LDK, tamed and working and dealing with all of the intricacies of Lightning and trying to have a decent user experience, which is a lot easier said than done. With slash tags, we ran into some legal issues with the name of it. And so we actually have a whole new brand and name that we'll be unveiling for it. And coincidentally, we also kind of reworked the design, a lot of it, with the learnings that we've had in the past couple of years. So we'll also just be relaunching the whole thing. So that will happen towards, actually, we'll start releasing pieces of it in a couple of months. But the actual, like, culmination of all of that work will be in Q3, Q4, about like late October probably. We'll probably announce that stuff at Plan B again in Lugano. Blocktank, what's changed and evolved there is we originally had a lot of aspirations for business models for it, and we even created some business model oriented products like Blocktank Instant. But as we did more research on the legal side, we're based in BVI as a legal entity, and they've already adopted all of the VASP laws and license requirements. And our lawyers are a little more risk averse than probably most lawyers. And we just decided we didn't want to get a license to be able to do LSP stuff. And so we limit the size of the channels we sell and the customers that we sell to only being BitKit users now. So we've just narrowed the scope of Blocktank a lot. We were hoping to make like a whole, open source LSP. Everybody use our thing. This is the future. And we have all these services. Everybody's shopping from our LSP. But it's just, I don't want Synonym to be that kind of company where we have like a compliance team and all those kinds of things. And so we just steered away from it and minimized it. We did evolve and create the LSP specs group, which has actually grown and it has become, pretty elaborate. And so that was a good positive change forward for Lightning and LSPs. That work is still in progress and will be in progress for a long time, but some of the specs are already ready and some of them are already being implemented by people. So that's cool. Otherwise, we have a new product that we'll announce and launch I don't know if it'll be alpha or beta or what state it will be in for sure. But again, we'll launch that at Plan B in Lugano as well.
Right, but according to your tweets, you're not very positive on the Lightning Network. I recall very precisely that 5 years ago, you're with Luke Dash Jr. when he said that he wants to reduce the block size on his node to 333 kilobytes, so that this would accelerate Lightning adoption. Now you don't seem to be as positive about either reducing the block size or onboarding users to Lightning. What happened?
A few things. One, we built a product with Lightning in it. That's probably the biggest thing, is just learning like the degree of complexity and fragility of Lightning, and especially for the use case that people intend for it, which is like end users running their own nodes. And even more crazy, end users running their own routing nodes. It's just very, very fragile. And going through that experience just made me realize that the design is kind of a joke. Like, we can make it work. We can do our best, but like all of the kind of narratives that came with it in the first couple of years were really exaggerated. Like things like Lightning is going to kill Visa and everybody will be using Lightning. And there are a lot of issues with scaling it economically. There are a lot of issues with dealing with all of the multiple implementations and incompatibilities, and again the fragilities causing force closes, liquidity management, and it just like goes on and on and on. And all of the things that like people that aren't engineers and aren't building these products, like even if they feel like they fully appreciate the complexity because they like study it a lot, they still don't get it. Like it's just so much worse than people think to actually make this stuff and string it together. What was the other part of your question? I mentioned about Lightning
And reducing the block size.
yeah. So when my intentions back then were multiple. So one, I wanted to show Luke support because I thought that he was very innovative in how he handled the whole SegWit thing and being able to do the block size with a soft fork. He kind of had a little reputation for himself for kind of whipping out these interesting solutions to things in the past, at least 2 or 3 times. And so I was like, all right, maybe this guy is onto something here. And I was feeling that way at the same time that I was feeling like finally realizing that we did really increase the block size, because that kind of aspect in 2017, it wasn't hidden so much as it was masked. Like, it was for people that were at my stage of learning and below, it was just like, okay, they say this is in there and they just say it as an afterthought and it just is what it is. Cool. And like, I later realized, I was just like, wait a minute, like we really did like make it as if that we were not going to do this hard fork but not just because hard forks are dangerous, but also because we didn't want to increase the block size. But we did increase the block size effectively. And I felt a little bit like duped, partly by my own ignorance, but I think that's also partly the responsibility of the elders of Bitcoin and such to make sure that doesn't happen. And so I supported that idea, and also, yeah, I wanted more people to use Lightning. My motives were a little bit immature, a little bit naive. Now looking at it, I would say the idea of reducing the block size is absolutely absurd. Like it would just I don't know where to start. I would say one issue that I think Bitcoiners definitely don't weigh heavily enough is how increasing fees are very centralizing. Like everybody worries about node costs being centralizing. Like, oh, if we make the blocks too big, people won't be able to afford initial block download and disk space and etc. And I'm just like, I just can't imagine that the costs of that would ever be as obnoxiously exclusive as constantly rising on-chain fees. And like if you can only if suppose it costs $1,000 to an on-chain fee, that like prices out like most of humanity. You know what I mean? And like that's a very, very centralizing factor. And I think that Bitcoiners, they just make these kind of convenient leaps just to pump the bags. And so if you say something that pumps the bags, then they're going to support you. If you say something that doesn't pump the bags, then you are dumb and ignorant and you don't understand Bitcoin. And that's kind of the level of things. And at this point, I think it actually, and in the past year or two, I've actually lost a lot of respect for Luke because his chaos factor is just out of control. I still think he has it in him to design interesting things, but he hasn't done that in a while, in my opinion. And the things that he's dug his heels on in the past couple of years, they've just made me lose that kind of respect that I used to have for him to support him somewhat ignorantly.
Yeah, maybe it's not useful to add up to this, but I lost my respect for Luke a year ago when he lost 200 Bitcoin. And then he started tagging FBI and CIA in tweets saying, "Help me." I mean, that was the moment when I realized, what's wrong with this guy?
I mean, I don't know what I would do if I lost 200 Bitcoin, so I don't want to like judge it too closely. But yeah, it is kind of like, all right, this guy did lose a lot of Bitcoin, and he's supposed to know what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still unclear what happened there. Last I heard, Peter Todd told me that he meaning Luke, basically did a too complex setup and he regrets it and he doesn't want to talk about it because his mistakes were pretty silly. I don't know, but then he came up with the filtering software and he asked people to run that under nodes. And I was like, why would anyone want to run software from the guy who just lost 200 Bitcoin? That was my first reaction.
Well, that was my original impression of Luke was bad. My first impression of him a long, long time ago, because he originally was the first guy to add blacklisting to Bitcoin. He encouraged blacklisting back, I don't know, when is Bitcoin Classic, when they were doing Sybil node or something, that when they were trying to Sybil attack the network. But there was some point where he was just like, he had a blacklist. And I was just like, oh man, this guy doesn't get it. And I think that's just that, regurgitated again. It's just another blacklist. I think the whole argument about censoring and versus spam is obnoxious. Like I think I try to stay out of it, but I think both sides sound pretty stupid. And I just think the idea of that, like somehow you could define something as spam, even though it pays the fee and follows the rules, is just a really dangerous idea. And so I'm surprised to hear it from people like him and Giacomo.
But John, I do remember at one point, it was probably last year, you tweeted out that we can always increase the block size to enable more scaling, to put more transactions into blocks, into main chain blocks. And Roger Ver came back and said something along the lines of, "I told you so." And if I recall correctly, he was also very skeptical of Lightning Network and said it takes too many years to develop. And this was back in 2017 that he said this. And my question for you right now is, if you did the same interview that you did in late 2017 with Roger, would you do anything differently?
Of course, I would do something differently. I would do a lot of things differently. I'm a much different not much different person, but I have had a lot of experiences since then. So I would have to be different just on what I've been through as a person. But a few interesting tidbits in this topic. I have tried to do an interview with Roger Ver at least twice, formally attempted. Most recently was just a month ago. Um, he refuses to do it unless I apologize publicly to him. Another interesting fact is I already have apologized publicly to him some years ago, where I tweeted out that I was sorry for that I wasn't intentionally trying to troll him. I forget what I said, but something along the lines of I wasn't intentionally trying to troll him, and I was particularly sorry for the accusations about the sock puppet things because I didn't actually have any evidence. It just seemed like a good guess. And the last thing I intended, because I know what it was. I saw an interview with him where he kind of could see on his face and in the words he used, I forget, but he still seemed like he regretted that and that he felt like bad about it. Not that he felt bad about what he did so much as he just felt embarrassed, I guess. And I don't want to make people feel bad. Like that's not my goal. I know that that's probably crazy for some people to hear, but my intention is not to hurt your feelings. My intention is to like discover the truth and correct, idiocy and things like this. And so I did apologize for those aspects, but he wanted me to apologize for like trapping him and tricking him and trolling him. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to apologize for saying Bcash naturally. It's just stupid. And so the interview hasn't happened. I don't recall his exact arguments with Lightning. It was a little bit before I think it was just after I stopped caring about what he said and a little bit before I was actually super hard into Lightning. And so I don't know that I followed it that closely. And I also think that I recall the arguments being more centered around something like that it wasn't actually Bitcoin and it was a shit coin and it was centralized. And none of those are my concerns even with Lightning today. I don't think the centralization of Lightning is the problem. In fact, it's the only solution. And yeah, I just don't see it as a shit coin. I see it as actual Bitcoin transactions. I see Lightning is more like a custom mempool turned into a network than a shit coin. So yeah.
Yeah, so Roger, if you're listening to this, please talk with John. If you don't feel comfortable, I can moderate the discussion. It can happen right here on live stream.
Yep. Peter McCormick offered, but yeah, he was the one that tried to negotiate the last attempt. But yeah, it was the deal broke. Well, I'm not going to publicly apologize for things I don't feel sorry for.
Yeah, so just to be sure, Roger, if you're listening to this and watching this once again, I'm going to ask John to do the Bcash dance once again, just to be sure that you don't get the impression that you will ever apologize for that. So you can do it, John.
No, I'm not doing the dance. And I wanted people, I don't know why, people are like, you did troll him, but I didn't dance until after he flipped me off. So I don't understand when I was trolling. It must just be saying Bcash like naturally. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line because in some regards, Roger was right. He made a lot of public bets in 2018 with people and said, I bet you that Bitcoin Cash, BCH, is gonna get more traction and merchant adoption than Lightning within 5 years or something like that. Obviously, it did not. And he thought just because it's technically complex, and by it, I mean the Lightning Network, he thought it was not going to get traction. And this is where he was most wrong. Because Lightning did get traction, and you don't need a PhD in computer science to use it, as he phrased it, but it does take a lot of time to develop and fully shape in a way that's usable and stable. And I think mostly the users of the Lightning Network have used it in good faith and did not steal from each other. But technically, you can do a lot of ugly stuff with forced channel closings, and you can trigger that punishment system where you steal other people's coins, and you need watchtowers to further centralize the network to make sure that stealing doesn't happen. I mean, there are some tweaks that you need to do for Lightning to work properly. So Roger was right that it's too complex, but he was wrong about what the users are going to do. So he predicted this wrongly.
It's tricky for me to like isolate exactly where he was right and he was wrong so much as he was definitely right about more than Bitcoiners give him credit for. And some of his intentions were more pure than many Bitcoiners today. What he definitely had wrong was just his own, like, he was very arrogant, and he was very arrogant in a way where he was willing to lie and he was willing to twist the truth in order to deliver his message. And he was willing to fork Bitcoin. And so he basically, like, he fired himself from Bitcoin when he thought he was saving Bitcoin, but he really should have seen that. And he didn't, and he doesn't to this day, as far as I know. And so I think his problem is just, his ego is too twisted to be able to carry through and truly serve whatever intentions of his portion of his intentions were pure. Like, I think the intention to, like, have as many people be able to use Bitcoin as possible is a good one. I think the intention to want to be able to use Bitcoin as currency day to day is an interesting one, even if it's not possible. You know what I mean? Like, those intentions, that, in other words, I see ideals as a direction, and I like moving in those directions more than moving in other directions. But he just went totally off course, and that was his downfall.
Yeah. And it's been 19 minutes since we started this interview. I gotta present an ad. I apologize, John, for putting you on pause for a moment. I gotta talk about Wasabi Wallet, which is the main sponsor of the show and has been for like 3 years. Recently, they added a very interesting feature which is topical to what we're discussing right now. They have this buy anything button, which opens up a Tor routed interface to ShopInBit, and you're talking with one of their salesmen and you tell them what you want to buy and where you want it to get delivered. And they're going to prepare that delivery, they're going to send it, you pay with Bitcoin, you pay with Bitcoin that used in CoinJoins, because there was always this FUD that once you put your Bitcoin in CoinJoins, they're not going to be accepted on exchanges. Now it's different. You deal with a merchant which actually prefers Bitcoin with a greater degree of privacy. And you have this option, and it's very good for the Bitcoin economy. You pay directly to a website which is basically Amazon, but with a concierge service. So if they don't have something, they're going to bring it for you. And you can get Wasabi Wallet for free at wasabiwallet.io. For amounts lower than 0.01 BTC, you don't pay a coordination fee. And they also did, just today, they announced this, a 20% increase in the size of the minimum CoinJoin. It used to be at least 150 participants. Now it's 180 participants. So the number goes up all over the board. WasabiWallet.io, check them out. Did you ever use Wasabi, John?
Not in a long time. I used it, and they'll remember this. I used it, and there was a bug, and I thought I lost some Bitcoin in there. And then after that, I was just I played with it and did it a while, but I don't have the same belief in CoinJoin as some people, and I just don't really. I know they're going to hate me for saying this, but I just don't really have that much to hide in that regard, and so and I think that, like, there are other methods of achieving it that are cheaper and more effective. And I've talked with the Wasabi guys a lot about my philosophies about privacy, and they seem to think that the way I look at it is interesting, and we can have civil conversations. But I don't actually use CoinJoining. Yeah.
Interesting. So what is your recommended method to make your Bitcoin private?
I mean, my recommendation is don't tell people what you do to make your Bitcoin private. um, that's probably step one. But no, I think that there are, yeah, like, I think Paul Sports actually did. I think he made like a little software tool for just randomly sending Bitcoin to yourself. That's probably not that much worse than CoinJoining. It might even be better, depending on who you're trying to hide from. I think that CoinJoining and anything like that is good for, like, avoiding amateur surveillance. I think it's much more questionable for avoiding, state level or similar surveillance. So yeah, that's some perspective on that.
Yeah, the value proposition of a CoinJoin is that even if you know that people use it, you don't know the outputs. So you might as well KYC all of the inputs. You might know who they are, But in the output section, you're not gonna know which is which because there are some divisions, there are some consolidations that happen randomly. And if there is a second coin join, which is generally referred to as a remix, it's gonna be even more difficult to figure out anything. I think the off ramp, the moment when you spend, is the one when you reveal what actually happened there. But maybe that you're going to spend a much smaller UTXO than the one with which you entered. So that still grants you a pretty good amount of privacy. And maybe that you never use the KYC on ramp, off ramp, and you're going to sell for cash or something like that.
Well, I mean, so far, I actually was kicked off exchanges like years ago, before CoinJoin was even a thing, twice. And but since then, I've been lucky enough to keep my accounts, and so I don't really need to worry about that too much. I suppose that could change. But to get into a little detail, what you mentioned, my concern with CoinJoining is that it's difficult for people that don't know how to monitor it. It's a lot less difficult for people that do. And the crux of it basically being that they don't care, if they know somebody in that set is who they want to watch, they'll just watch the whole set and dedupe it over time. And so the issue is that eventually that the people that care about privacy less than you start merging their UTXOs and start revealing their identity, through KYC or identifiable usage, and that they eventually can triangulate things, very accurately. And I don't think they're going to share how easy it is or hard it is for them to do that. And so you're never really going to know how protected you really are.
Yeah, another aspect is that Bitcoin privacy is still difficult. You still need to watch out for every UTXO and see which address it's connected and who might know about it. And you need to track all of this process with each of your UTXOs if you want to remain private. And just one random consolidation that you make can actually taint you, or a dust attack. I think that used to be a thing. Now it's no longer a thing due to high fees.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty much what I'm saying, that the people that care less about privacy than you will end up compromising your privacy. And that's one of the issues.
But I also think that Bitcoin has a built-in fungibility system with fees. So basically the Bitcoin that gets paid out as a transaction fee is gonna get mined into a block and released into the free market.
I feel like I'm the one that taught you this, but because I discovered this a long time ago, and I feel like I probably shared it with you at that time, because it's it's something that, like, I've never heard anybody say in public other than me. Maybe you learned it elsewhere, but yeah, I was informed of this when I was trying, back when I was talking about how Bitcoin is not fungible, and all of the reasons that it's not. Somebody pointed out, oh, but actually fees are, and you can, do it this way. And so I've always wondered, when you see those times where it's like, so and so accidentally did like a 20 Bitcoin fee, I always wonder if that's actually the miner, just washing some coins.
Yeah, that's possible, but you never know which mining pool is going to pick up that transaction unless they have every other mining pool on speed dial.
No, but when they make the block, they can just include it in the template and just inject it into the block. They don't have to put it in the mempool.
Oh, that too. I also know that, for example, there's which exchange? I think it's F2 Pool. They have a trademark 2 sats per byte transaction that they make for their own internal affairs. And they sign it accordingly. It's funny when you see it. It's almost like they're making fun of the rest of the network, like, oh, we can do this and you can't.
I guess there's no point in overpaying yourself a fee, but yeah. Well, except other than the point I just mentioned.
Yeah. So, what is your current vision on the Lightning Network? I remember 4 years ago, maybe, you were on calls with Adam Back trying to convince him that Liquid is not the way and Blockstream should go full Lightning. And this is where I guess you disagreed with him. But you seem to also have changed your opinion on Lightning a bit.
I would say that I still think that effort was accurate. In other words, I do think Blockstream should have done that, and they took way too long to do it, but they eventually did. And Greenlight is like the most successful Blockstream product that I know of right now, as far as like people actually caring about it. It's helping Breeze redefine their company. It's getting a lot of traction with people who want a simpler way to implement Lightning. It's finally got green with some Lightning in it, the green wallet. I thought it was absurd that they had all this like siloed project kind of behavior in their company, where green wallet, they had one part like making a whole Lightning implementation, which is really hard work, and then the other part just not caring. No effort to put Lightning on mobile. I just thought it was absurd. And then Liquid, yeah, I'm glad you remember that, because it was like I don't know, 3 or 4 hour call that I had with him, where I think I told you the story where my Romanian girlfriend at the time was like, she thought I was like having an affair because I was yelling at somebody on the phone. And she was like, "What's going on there? Who was that?" And like, she was like jealous. And I'm like, "No, it was Adam Back." She's like, "No, it wasn't." But yeah, I have been a anti-liquid since literally day one. And I hope that people realize that when they see me making memes, as recently as yesterday, about making fun of it and making fun of how people portray it, at least. Um, yeah, I do think they should have done that. I do think that um, Lightning is a better pursuit than Liquid. Um, but as far as like my view changes on it, well, part of it comes from having, dealing with implementing it and all of the, kind of loose ends that we have to tie to get it to work, but also just thinking more about the economics of it and, how the complexity affects things. Um, I'm a little bit scared, basically, to make it simple. I'm a little bit scared that all of the, or most of the, savings that Lightning is going to provide by providing high frequency transactions um, are currently being subsidized by like investment into the industry and people having like liquidity that is really cheap, like to be able to create channels with it. Like for example, like we have a good deal with Bitfinex for the Bitcoin for our node. Phoenix or Eclair and Async, they have also must have a really good deal, because nobody is charging, what I would consider market rates for locking up this Bitcoin and putting it at risk in a hot wallet. And so I'm worried that basically it's an illusion that Bitcoin is actually saving people a lot of money and able to do microtransactions, and that the overall cost to the user is just going to keep going up. That eventually you're going to hit, fees of like at least 1 to 3% for routing. You're going to have to pay up front for the amount of time that you're locking up the Bitcoin, probably at an APR of something between 1 to 6% per year. And this is all going to add up to like a trend where transacting on Lightning is just going to continually approach the price of transacting on chain. Will it reach it exactly? Probably not. But will it come much closer than people are comfortable with? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And that means that the kind of last certainty with Lightning is for B2B transacting, which those are like people that actually do a lot of high frequency, right? Like just the example I bring up is Bitfinex has an integration with Bitrefill. And so Bitfinex users can buy gift cards with their Bitfinex balances. And Bitfinex and Bitrefill can settle all of those transactions one-to-one dynamically without having to have credit terms with each other. And that's like the primary use case of Lightning. And you don't even really need the network aspect and for that. And that's really the most complex part and the worst part of Lightning, which is also another reason why I'm not a big fan of Taproot assets, because they lean on this part of Lightning as a transfer method. I just think that that's not going to work. Yeah, rant over.
Oh, yes. I do recall someone telling me a few months ago that Lightning was oversold and overhyped as this retail solution for the average user to save money on transaction fees and also be able to run their own node from home on a Raspberry Pi. And maybe that Lightning is fine for business, as you said, B2B. That's abbreviation for business to business, as opposed to it being for the average user to make small transactions on a regular basis and also be able to manage their own node, which, for the record, I did try to manage my own node twice, and I tried to route transactions. And it became increasingly hard. I was losing channels. I had to rebalance, and overall, I think I lost more money in fees than I would have paid if I just did on-chain transactions when they were cheap, which is super ironic. That should have not been the way, but I guess it's the
Yeah, that
price to
that was
pay
one of
for
the
being.
sorry, that was one of the
It's
narratives and scams I didn't like that was promoted about Lightning. Like saying it's going to be the next Visa is one thing; it's somewhat harmless, although it is vast miseducation. But telling people that they'd be able to passively earn income on their Bitcoin by putting it on Lightning, this was a big lie. This was like no way. Like PlebNet was such an embarrassment, not because plebs trying to be involved, but because they actually thought that they were going to make something out of it. Like they were fooled, and I don't think that's cool.
Yeah. I do recall I was part of Rings of Fire, and I was part of Lightning Plus and stuff like that. And I was opening channels with people, and someone who was some sort of architect was making plans for these circles of users, opening channels with each other. So, in the event that a payment was going through, everyone was going to route it. It was pretty ingenious for its time, but the hardware that we were running was not reliable. We were all running Tor nodes, which was making every transaction much slower and not reliable. And in the end, I think I was making like 60 satoshis a month from routing. And I was paying much
Yeah.
more for just one on-chain transaction to
Yeah.
rebalance.
And it's hard because you either end up in a situation where there's inefficiency and people can help with it, but eventually this will consolidate and all the subsidies will fall away and you will see like what's actually left over and what it actually costs. And I think people are going to be disappointed. That doesn't mean that I quit Lightning or that I think Lightning is bad. It just means that I have a much more realistic view of where to draw the line. I haven't drawn the line at giving up on having it in a personal wallet, with a mobile LDK node. I still think we can pull that off as best we can. I'm just a little worried that even if we pull it off, the fees will just eventually be too much of a deterrent for people. Like if they have to pay $50 to open a channel because on-chain fees, like we end up usually having to pay the closing costs. And so if on-chain fees are like consistently rising and we can see that trend where we know that by the time this person closes, it's probably going to be an even higher fee than when it opened, we're inclined to charge at least double the on-chain fee because we have to pay it twice. And so this just makes the channels like I'm not paying $100 to use Lightning. I'm not paying $50 to use Lightning. Most people will say. So yeah.
Yeah. I received a message from Paul Storts, or as you call him, Sports, and he
Mm-hmm.
told me I should read this in the middle of the stream for no reason. And he
Oh,
says,
jeez.
is Blockstream going downstream? Has RGB getting you down and brown and ground? After a long day of listening to Peter McRetard, why not feel something for a change? Feel alive. Join Layer 2 Labs and make everyone feel sad and frustrated and angry. Our next ritual is at 3 a.m. in the ancient forest. See you there. I'm Paul Storrs and I approve this message. Or do I?
I hope he paid you for that.
I hope he's gonna pay me for this. It's potentially libelous, so he should.
So I'll take this since he took the time to interrupt my time, and I would never support a sponsorship from Layer whatever Labs. I will say that I am very disappointed in Paul and Layer 2 Labs and Austin, I think his name is, or whoever that guy is. I think they've embarrassed themselves. They've burnt bridges they didn't need to burn just to be able to meme or try or make half-assed attempts at promoting their proposal. I think that it's okay to have the proposal. I don't think it's evil to to try to do what they're doing. I don't think it is nearly as interesting as they think it is, and I really don't think it'll ever be on Bitcoin. So I don't think it's worth making an ass of yourself to promote it. And they have done that. And Paul has lost my respect because of the ways he's behaved to me and others. And Layer 2 Labs is just clown show, honestly. So there's your ad, Paul.
I hope he's gonna watch this. Pretty sure he is. Anyway, I was going to ask you something because you mentioned at one point that you're more open to the idea of increasing the block size than you were in the past. You tweeted about this a while ago, and I was going to ask you if there is any reasonable approach or limit to doing this.
Um, so I think I saw one of the guys in your tweet about this interview complaining about my takes on this. I believe he called me the most intellectually dishonest person in Bitcoin. I obviously do not agree with this assessment, but what I'll say is what I'm trying to promote is critical thinking when making decisions about what to care about with Bitcoin. And so there's always a context to what I'm speaking about, and I try to make that context clear. Sometimes I'm more cryptic, and that comes off a bit trolly, and I'm not going to apologize for that so much as say I can't help it. But what I want is for people to be just as interested, if not more interested, in doing research about the actual costs of things and the demographics that are affected or excluded by costs of things, so they can make a proper judgment as to whether they should be considering this vast amount of complexity to, say, add soft forks to Bitcoin so something like Lightning can happen, or whether to do something like add a zero conf flag that, even though might not be perfectly enforced, might get us through 10 years of Bitcoin with instant transactions, and raise the block size a little bit in order to not be exclusive to people on chain fees. And so I'm just trying to get people to be able to like have a mental model that is rational and makes sense. This is also why I like Eric Voskuil's work so much, because he's the only one that like actually tries to like provide this mental model, and nobody else even tries. They just kind of bullshit associative rant on every podcast, and they don't really, when they get back into a corner, they just revert to some new topic. And they don't have a mental model that they can like confidently walk around in like he does, and like I'm trying to build. So I would say I do think that block size is not only okay but inevitable. Block size increase. I'm not going to pretend to prescribe the best way to do it so much as I would obviously, like to see any proposal that is taken seriously be a soft fork to some degree. Even though, Eric would say he doesn't believe in soft forks, and they're all, effectively new splits and such, or at least potentially splits. But yeah, so I don't want a hard fork. I'm not advocating for a soft fork right now. And I'm not advocating for any soft fork for anything, whether it be block size or CTV or whatever. I just don't think any of that is even half as important as the engineers that made it make it out to be. But I do think it would be interesting to always be aware of who we are excluding from Bitcoin and in what quantity as certain costs rise, whether they be on-chain fees or block size increases, and that we are reasonable and just say, look, like we accepted XYZ cost proportion for size and bandwidth 10 years ago, and now all of the costs have decreased this much, and we would unlock, a million more people having to have access to Bitcoin. If they, we increase fees, increase block size, reduce fees by X%, increase cost of node running by X or Y%, and the math checks out, and just have awareness of it. If the math doesn't check out, then we have awareness of that too. I'm not saying I'm going to ignore reality so much as I think mostly everybody else is ignoring reality. Complexity is much more expensive than people are making it out to be. Things like sharing a UTXO for channel factories, for CTV and Lightning covenants. This stuff, like after having been through Lightning, it's all bullshit, man. Like it'll get used by a few people. It'll get invested in by $500 million of startups, and then that $500 million subsidy will go away, and then everybody will realize it just wasn't as big a deal as people thought it was. I don't mind having, UTXO sharing as an option for people. I just don't think it is actually a scaling solution. I think it's just a niche use case, and it becomes permissioned and centralized at scale. It has all kinds of weird after effects when you're like unfurling these things. I think it's a mess, and we already have one mess we can barely deal with.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting because it seems like we're focusing on adding more complexity when in fact the goal is to help it scale more. And the
Yeah.
complexity is designed in a way that it purposely avoids this idea of increasing the block size, which is taboo. It became taboo. And whenever you mention it, people say, "Oh, you haven't read the block size worse." I think that's the name of the book. And
No,
then you
I
say,
was
"Oh,
in
but
that
I
book,
lived
but I
that,"
did
you
read
know.
it actually. Yeah, yeah, I lived it and I did read it. So fuck you, whoever says this. Yeah, maybe another way to look at it is I can actually do research to measure the impact of a block size increase. I can't do research to measure the impact and cost of the Lightning Network. Like it's so much harder to measure that. And to measure it preemptively, like we can measure the network and the cost of things right now and have real data. Yeah, we'd have to trust the data collectors and such, but the reality is here and we can measure it. I can't predict what it will cost and how long it will take to do lightning covenants or or channel factories and such. Like I have no idea how to like provide an analysis for that. Nobody does, but I can do that with block size increases. And if I can do that and show you that it's reasonable, you have no argument. You know what I mean? Like that's how I see
Oh,
it.
they do have arguments. I did see Bashko, who is the moderator of RBTC on Reddit. He said that if you have more block space, it's gonna be filled with more ordinal inscriptions. So basically, you're enabling cheaper spam. And that's the argument that a lot of people use when you say, we should have more
But
users on
that doesn't
Bitcoin.
mean anything. That's like saying there are transactions that I don't like, and if you increase the block size, the proportion of them will be larger. So what? Who cares? Like that's not the point. The point is that you're providing a deeper spectrum of fee availability. It's like right now there'll be a floor of I don't know what it is right now, probably 35 VSATs or whatever it's called, and that would be reduced by some amount because you'd be reaching deeper into the mempool length, more blocks into the mempool length. Now, if it's an insignificant amount, then I would say no. Like, don't increase the block size. Don't waste the time of trying to pull off a soft fork and whatever risks are around that. It's not worth it. But if I saw that, like, 10% of the global South could now actually use Bitcoin, I'd be like, that's interesting. You know, it's research worth doing, data worth measuring, and the whole ordinals thing is just a nonsense argument. I just can't accept it. It's not spam. They're paying the fee. And if if you care about nonsense things like security budget, which seems to come with the same people, well then having bigger blocks is more miners fees for miners too. So like, what are you talking about? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, they have a very Puritan view of what Bitcoin should be used for and how it should be used. And they, at least the non technical guys, and there are some technical guys who are not intellectually honest, but they say that if they filter this use case, this type of transacting, then all the spam is gonna go away. And then you have Mike in Space. I'm not sure if you're aware of his stamps, but these are much worse. They are basically multi-sigs, which take up a lot of block space and they are much more inefficient with the UTXO set. It's a disaster. If people who do ordinal inscriptions switch to that instead, even if it's more expensive, it's terrible.
But this is a problem that is separate from the block size. In other words, if there are complexities in Bitcoin that allow people to do things with Bitcoin that are unintended, you can have a discussion about changing Bitcoin so those use cases are not possible. If you can't do anything about that, in other words, if the use case is just always going to find a way, it's just a flaw in Bitcoin that you have to accept. And so I don't think that ordinals people are somehow more rich than non-ordinals people, and thus spam to them is like something they can infinitely afford. This is nonsense. Eventually, anybody spamming you runs out of money. A DDoS attack is not infinite. They run out of resources, they get bored, they stop having a way to profit off their behavior, and it goes away. I see it more like the weather. And so when I talk about a conversation about whether or not block size increase would be interesting, it's just totally separate than what those blocks are filled with. If you don't like what the blocks are filled with, then change the rules of Bitcoin itself. But good luck with that.
I did have a similar conversation with Kevin Loic. I'm not sure how you pronounce that correctly, but he's the CEO of Wizard Sardine and he co-created Liana Wallet. And he was pretty upset at these people screaming spam because he said, okay, first of all, the fee is the spam filter. So that one is in place to prevent spamming. And as long as you pay the fee, it's fine. And if it respects the consensus rules, it's also fine. And if you don't like them, why don't you use the free market instrument, which is you outbid them, you pay more than they pay, so that they don't have their transactions confirmed. But it seems like for some reason the culture was absorbed by these hippies who want everything to cost 1 sat per vbyte, and if it doesn't, they're gonna be upset. But they don't want a block size increase either. So it's a paradox there. And then they say you should withdraw your coins from exchanges. But if you have less than $20 or something, it's not economical because you're gonna pay just as much for the fee. And I don't know how are we going to
And then on Tuesday, they're going to say Liquid is scaling and Fedimints are awesome and scale Bitcoin through custody. There's a lot of dissonance in Bitcoin
Uncle
arguments.
Jim. You gotta trust Uncle Jim, right?
This is what happens when like you learn through memes, because memes are just like narratives that have been like oversimplified, and then people are always fascinated by the part of a meme or the part of a metaphor that is wrong. That's the part that fascinates them, not the part that you're actually trying to use as an example, as a learning instrument. They care about the part that's wrong the most because it's the most magical, because it's not true. And so people build like their mental models off of number go up, infinity over 21 million, and all these ridiculous things. And in the end, what they don't want to admit is they only care about things that they believe will pump their bags. And they don't really care about your privacy problems, your fee problems, your any of this stuff, scaling. They don't care. They just care about what looks like their ability to measure the trend and see whether or not they should be a tastemaker and whether this is a yes or a no. And once that they can identify that within their tribe, they subscribe to that, that taboo or that rule, and that's that. And now anytime you say something that is against that, you get you're not part of my tribe, let's kill your tribe. It's just primitive, unintelligent nonsense.
Oh my god, John, you're so lucky right now that these people don't listen to my show. They're not gonna unfollow you on Twitter. You're fine.
I mean, I'm not saying this here because of that. I'm saying this because I would say it if anybody asked in any venue, on stage, doesn't matter. Like, this is me. At least me now, at least.
It's definitely interesting to see how your views have evolved over time, even though the intentions have remained the same. It's just the means and your understanding of these means that has changed, and it's pretty fascinating. But what are your issues with Liquid and Fediment, just to make it clear?
So again, to add nuance, I don't have an issue with custodians. I don't have an issue with people using custodians if it solves their problems. That's not the topic. The topic is simply that you have to actually know how to think about these things and where to put them in your mental model. And the fact is that there's no way to meaningfully distinguish Liquid from a shitcoin, from wrapped Bitcoin, from all of these things that people are considering taboo. But it's okay when you put a Blockstream sticker on it or a Bitcoin sidechain sticker on it. And that to me is like, it's ignorant, it's manipulative. On the other side, it doesn't make any sense. So my issue with Liquid specifically is that it's like just a bank. Like, it's just a group of people that will hold your Bitcoins for you and give you a shitcoin that does a lot of the same things Bitcoin does, plus a few more. And then when you want to stop using their shitcoin, they are making a promise that they will enforce the exchange rate of 1-to-1. And that's it. It's a shitcoin that you can only buy using Bitcoin. That's it. And if you conflate this with scaling or make this compromise to include this in your Bitcoin product, you just aren't a Bitcoin maximalist. Like, you're literally telling people to use something else, and that's just not using Bitcoin. And I make this acceptance for something like Lightning, even though it's not purely on chain the way normal Bitcoin transactions are, because Lightning is at least something you can self enforce, has the unilateral exit, and it's literally Bitcoin transactions. And so it's like, it's hard for me to say, okay, like this is also a shitcoin, or this is totally trusted, because you can reasonably and rationally point out how, like, okay, like I can definitely handle enforcing this myself. I can definitely see how it could provide an advantage to certain people. Granted, less people than I used to think, but people nonetheless. I can rationalize that. But with Liquid or Fediment, the Fediment thing is just like, it's just the same thing as Liquid, just rearranged and repackaged. It's just a group of people that get to hold all your Bitcoin, and you somehow, in the Liquid case, have to figure out how to trust those people, even though you don't know who they are. And then in the Fediment case, you have to basically choose your mint and like who you're going to trust. And I don't think anybody has like 3 people that they would nominate to hold their Bitcoin for them. Maybe in these niche communities, like how Bitcoin Beach Wallet does, and maybe I don't know anything about the culture of Africa, and it's just Fediment's going to go wild there. But I'm skeptical because they already have Tether. They already have, other means that they can do Tether on Tron, and it's just going to be simpler for them. They're not going to have to deal with the things they have to deal with. It's going to be probably the same user experience or better because it's cheaper. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think that some of the narratives and assumptions around eCash and mints are just trends. It's like with Lightning. Like at first it's magic and everybody's willing to accept a bunch of like fuzzy edges around what it can do and what it can't do and what it's good for and what it's viable for. And then after a year or two in the next bear market, everybody's going to be just giving up because it didn't help them pump their bags. It's they can't raise money on that narrative anymore, and they'll make a new narrative. Like I just don't think that innovating banking technology is a Bitcoin topic. And I think that Bitcoin is the last thing that you should be having be in custody. Like if you want to use custodial stuff, custody dollars and the amount that your monthly bill is, and just use a credit card or custody gift cards, or, like actually have a relationship that is complementary to you. Like I would rather have a gift card from a company that I actually shop with than credit from 3 guys that I don't know that I can trust, or credit from this federation of anonymous things, which I don't even know how many of them are the same people or not. It doesn't make sense to me.
My God, John. You just said 90% of what Paul Storch says when he promotes Drivechains. So
Well,
can you remind me where you disagree with him and
Paul
Drivechains?
Storch and I were together the day the Liquid's white paper was released. We were at the same event, and we both went back to our rooms to read it when it was released, if I remember correctly how it worked. So, and we both came out of our rooms to talk shit about it after we were done reading it. So, like, this is like the most bonding moment I've had with Paul is about how Liquid is nonsense.
Okay, but where do you disagree with Drivechains?
Because they're also shitcoins. Like, there's no blockchains are logically distinct. They are logically separate assets. And so you can't scale a blockchain with a blockchain. You can just say, use a different blockchain. And there's no advantage to Bitcoiners to have that directly, basically the ability for miners to escrow Bitcoins in order to back a extra blockchain. That feature is not a feature for Bitcoiners. It's a feature for miners who want to diversify their income to shitcoins. And I don't want incentives to be warped on Bitcoin, and I don't need shitcoins. If I wanted a shitcoin, I have many to choose from. I don't need one to be on Bitcoin, quote unquote, because it wouldn't be on Bitcoin. What would be on Bitcoin is this method to be able to escrow with miners, so you can anchor these things to Bitcoin. And then you have this like delayed, exit thing, which is basically just going to result in some sort of discount on the Bitcoin, and every single sidechain is probably just going to trend to zero because nobody wants to take the added risks of those sidechains. Like, it's really more, I honestly think that shitcoins are better than Drivechains. That's why I don't support them.
Oh, that's a big statement, because you call pegged Bitcoin on a sidechain a shitcoin just because it's Z-side or whatever, like a Zcash sidechain. And
Can you
you're
restate
arguing
that?
that it's a shitcoin because the peg is not going to hold out and it's not going to be worth 1 BTC at all
Well, those
times.
are just side arguments. What I'm saying is they're all shitcoins. All blockchains are shitcoins because the definition in my book of a shitcoin is a blockchain that's inferior to Bitcoin, particularly in security. That can be because it's more centralized or it's actually less secure, whatever way you want to manifest that. But shitcoins are just other blockchains that compete with Bitcoin that are less secure than Bitcoin. And this would be true of every single drive chain. And it would be true of every single shitcoin as far as I know. I don't know of any that have some kind of great design that somehow makes it more resilient than Bitcoin, but I guess it's possible. I doubt it. But when a shitcoin is mentally and logically distinct instead of logically distinct but mentally, gray area of drive chain, then you actually know what's going on. You can rationally think about it. You can say, okay, do I want to convert and take the risks of this shitcoin to do what I'm trying to do because I can't afford to do it on Bitcoin or because I want bigger blocks, blah 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 blah. Like, the actual qualities of the blockchain affect its value, and so one BTC does not equal one DBTC, or drive chain Bitcoin. They're just not equal. And you can make all the arguments you want about that this can be arbitraged, etc. But the point is that it will just trend to zero as soon as people don't like the security trade-off. And I just think that's just useless. I think it'll be an experiment. It'll fade away. Maybe we'll discover some niche thing that people like to do it for. Like maybe the Monero's drive chain kills Monero. I don't know. But I just don't care. I don't need it. And I don't like how it changes the incentives on Bitcoin and affects people that don't use it potentially. So I just don't think it's worth the risks. If you want another blockchain, you have many to choose from already.
That is definitely an interesting take because it assumes that every other blockchain, which is not Bitcoin, acts as a bona fide scaling layer because other users can use that to perform some financial actions, which are not on Bitcoin. Of course, they're shitcoins, but they're useful for other people. And essentially, maybe that they don't afford Bitcoin, maybe that the 10-minute confirmation time is too long for what they're trying to do. So they're gonna do that elsewhere. And you also mentioned Tether on Tron, which I think is an interesting topic because I went to Argentina to La BitConf in November. And I tried to buy stuff with Lightning, and I realized that I couldn't buy merchandise, I couldn't buy some stuff that they were selling there because they would not accept it. They said, it's fine if you give us Tether on Binance or Tether on Tron, or maybe Ethereum, but the fees are too high. And I was like, is this a Bitcoin conference? And they said, it doesn't matter because this is what this market uses mostly.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the first time I've heard that. I've never used Tether on any chain, but so I can't really comment, firsthand. But yeah, I've heard from many people that this is happening in various parts of the world, and I can't argue that it doesn't make sense. Um, as far as there was something you said earlier, that I would just add the nuance that Eric Roscoe might disagree with me on this, or he at least would portray it differently. I don't actually consider other blockchains to be a method of scaling Bitcoin because I consider them all blockchains to be competitive. And this is maybe something where we differ, but that could just be because I don't fully understand his model yet. And maybe I'll agree with him eventually. But at the moment, I do see all blockchains as competition. And so I don't think that I would call that scale because you're just using something else, right? So when you say you're scaling, you always have to be clear about what you're scaling. Are you scaling Bitcoin? Certainly not. Are you scaling using blockchains? Sure. Are you scaling using cryptocurrency or Tether? Maybe. It's definitely not scaling Bitcoin to use something else, and that includes drive chains.
Well, the assumption is that after you're done using Tether, you're going to be buying Bitcoin with that. And there is a competition for the ability to buy Bitcoin, of course. The block size is limited, the supply is limited. So not everyone in the crypto space is going to be able to convert all of their coins for Bitcoin. Or if they
Well,
do,
you're
they're
making an
going to pump the
assumption on
price.
why the person's using the alt chain. Like, if they're using it for Tether, then you're just saying, I want to use dollars now. And this is the most convenient method and the cheapest method. If they're wanting to have the exposure to a strong store of value, they might not choose they might choose a different altcoin. They might say, well, Litecoin has been around for a long time. It seems like it's going to be here for a long time more, and I want to hold this for longer, and I can't afford Bitcoin anymore. And so you might see people drop off to other chains just because they can't afford Bitcoin anymore. But that's still a loss to Bitcoin. In other words, now you have less value stored in Bitcoin. Maybe it's an insignificant amount and nobody cares, and they're more worried about pumping their bags and BlackRock owning Bitcoin. But that's just, I think that the future that Bitcoiners are willing to accept, where on-chain fees are extremely high and Bitcoin is backing other fiat, this is just not the future I want. Like, I don't want that. I would rather have hard conversations about on-chain scaling and things like this than just concede that, like, we solved store of value for rich people. Like, they didn't have that problem really for the most part.
Yeah, I agree with this. But how do you reconcile the idea that Paolo Ardoino was part of your team in Synonym? I see that he's no longer listed on the website. I think he was CTO at one point, or at least advisor. And how do you discuss with him the topic that Tether has a much larger volume every day than Bitcoin, and it seems to be a more popular choice among third world countries than Bitcoin?
I think people would be disappointed with the quantity of conversation that I actually have with Paulo. It's not as spicy as everybody might think. I talk to him about once a month. Um, and as far as like his role with Synonym, it is just advisory. It always has been. Um, so yeah, that's what we talk. We just talk about mostly when I want to spend more money and when I want his insight on something that is a hard decision. And there's not really any feedback back from Tether telling us what to do with our roadmap or what not to do. Um, as far as all that goes, as far as like Tether increasing while Bitcoin's not, I mean, I don't think we discuss it because we both are resolved about it. We have nothing to discuss. Like, I know why, he knows why. I don't see it as a problem for Bitcoin. Could be seen as a problem for Lightning, I guess, but I don't know. I don't want to speak for Paulo, and so I won't do that. But I don't think that he would say any of my views on Lightning currently are crazy. I think that he would probably express similar concerns, and he would probably point at, well, look, like, currency is currently being solved by Tether. And so you're going to have to compete with Tether if you want to do that. And do you think Lightning can do that? Can Lightning compete with Tether on shitcoin XYZ for millicents of a fee? No, I mean, it can't. But they're also not providing the same problem solving. Like, Bitcoin is something very different than dollars and very different than Tether. And I guess that's another reason why I don't like the liquid stuff, because it just moves back towards that realm. It's just custody and trusted. And for me, trust, the only question that matters is who, not how.
Yeah, but it's also interesting that at the same time you have Bitfinex that invests simultaneously into Synonym and Blockstream. And for this reason, do you ever feel like you're competing with Synonym against Blockstream?
I think technically Bitfinex is invested in Blockstream and Tether is invested in Synonym, but that doesn't change the question. But just to make that clarification, um, no, I have never thought of it that way. Not with Blockstream, at least. I have kind of felt that way when um, there were things like whether to invest in Omni Bolt or Omni Bolt research versus RGB versus whatever else is coming along. And what I'll just say is Tether, Apollo, Bitfinex, whomever is behind the decisions, I assume the boards of those companies as well, they don't seem too scared to invest in things that overlap. In other words, two companies that are trying to solve similar problems or two projects that are trying to solve similar problems, because I think they see it more as they want that problem solved and they're willing to invest in more than one variation at attempting to solve it. And so as far as Blockstream, no, I don't consider them competition at all. Um, I guess that's strange now that I say it out loud, but it's true. They do also make a wallet. They do also do Lightning things. They have Greenlight, and I guess there are definitely are levels that we compete. I just don't look at it that way. I guess I'm not scared. Is probably why. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but feel free to add nuance.
No, it was interesting because I thought about this before. I also thought about it at one point when there was Cypherpunk Ventures, which is a VC firm that was investing at the same time in both Wasabi and Samurai. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, since they have the same company that invests in them, are they not going to have some sort of convergence because they were still fighting?
Well, again, I think not only in my case, but in probably in many cases, people would probably be disappointed with the amount of influence investors have on the companies. It's just not as spicy usually as people think. And when it is that way, it's kind of it emits it. You can kind of tell, like, oh, this is a company that is funded by these people, obviously, because they're just doing all these things that these people always do. But you don't see that so much in Bitcoin companies. A lot of Bitcoin investing is just like people who have more money than they probably deserve to have, trying to make a name for themselves as VCs, or just, you know, seeing if something will stick and hoping that like 1 in 10 of their investments does something, and investing somewhat ignorantly. I don't think it's a very sophisticated investing environment.
Yeah. Let me read another ad and then I'm gonna ask you more questions about Synonym today and how people can use the products right now. So this ad is from Hodling.ch. It's a company from Switzerland and they specialize in helping large holders and exchanges and businesses deal with the complexities of Bitcoin security. They say they provide peace of mind through a secure, private, and self-managed environment. In the Swiss tradition of precision and security, their services assist you in setting up, maintaining, and operating a self-custodial Bitcoin infrastructure. From the selection of multi-signature configurations and hardware wallets to ensuring your setup is robust and tailored to your needs. Go to hodling.ch if you want more details. Anyway, what is Synonym doing these days? And the average listener is going to be interested in downloading some app on their phone and trying the product. Which one do you think is the best fit for this use case?
Well, there's only one formal product app at the moment, which is BitKit. It's a mobile application that supports Bitcoin, Lightning, and slash tags features. Again, slash tags being the thing that's completely getting reworked and renamed, but the features will persist. It's in beta. It's been in beta for a while. The largest reasons are that implementing Lightning is hard and that we chose one of the more difficult ways to do it. And that we've just been growing as a team, trying to figure out how to be efficient and scale up the team and get many things done at once is my goal. So yeah, if you want to try BitKit, it's bitkit.to is the website, and there's Apple and Android. You will have to install the Apple app, what's it called, Test Flight, to be able to test the app. But it's an Apple app. Don't get scared of it if you haven't seen it before. It's normal. And there's also an APK available for download if you want to use something like I don't know, graphene or these other things that would require it. Yeah, the app is working a lot better every month. We did some pretty major updates the last couple months. There's still some bugs, and so don't put all your savings in there. But we are, like I said earlier, doing the audit and trying to come out of beta in June. And so that should be a milestone for us, assuming we hit that milestone. And then we'll actually begin promoting the app and, you know, trying to get as many users as we can. And then we'll have another product that we'll release that's a formal application in October as well.
I did see that there was this social media effort to redesign the symbol for Bitcoin. What was that all about?
Did you see the outcome?
Yes, I did see it, but I'm trying to let you explain the
Okay,
logic
you're
behind that.
giving me an assist. So yeah, we did a little bit of a troll by saying that we were going to unveil a new design for the sat symbol. And then what we unveiled was the Bitcoin symbol. And just the idea there, it wasn't just a troll. It's actually a sincere proposal, and we have implemented it in BitKit. And there are several other wallets now considering implementing it. So I would say check out satsymbol.org. That's only two S's, not three. And you can get a lot of the rationale there. But basically, what it is just removing all decimal points from Bitcoin and just having the only Bitcoin symbol be the B with the lines through it. And just, basically, sats is the only unit in Bitcoin. And you can call them sats, you can call them Bitcoin, you can call them bits. I don't care. But we're not going to call them anything. We're just calling it Bitcoin with like the symbol and then the quantity of units. And so if you have, say, one whole Bitcoin in your BitKit app, which I, again, don't put a whole Bitcoin in there yet, it's still in beta. If you have a whole Bitcoin in there, it would show as 100 million and with a Bitcoin symbol behind it. Some people have a lot of reservations about this. All the reservations and rationale is addressed in the website and or an interview that our designer did. Maybe our marketing guy was there too. I forget. Sorry, Matt, if you were there. Yeah, he was there with the Bitcoin design community, basically addressing their questions and their concerns. And I think overall we did a pretty good job communicating the message and the rationale behind it. And I do think, as with other things, that this is inevitable, and it's less time we have to wait for being inevitable if somebody makes the first step. And so we're just taking the first leap. Maybe we're too early. I don't know. I don't care. It's not going to cause any harm. I don't think there's going to be actual confusion from people using our apps because the units are so far away. Like one Bitcoin in 100 million is like a very big difference. Nobody's going to make that mistake. Yeah, that's the short of it.
I think this is one of the most bullish moves, you know. There was that whole Satoshi versus Bit debate. I took the Bit side just because it makes much more sense to call it a bit as opposed to a Satoshi. Calling it a Satoshi only opens up more questions like, why Satoshi? Well, because of the founder of Bitcoin. Who's Satoshi? Well, this mysterious guy, blah, blah, blah. We should not have that conversation when we
And then
tell
there's a
people,
sat shitcoin now too.
There's always been a sat shitcoin, and now there's a sat shitcoin on Bitcoin. I think that's what you're trying to point out, that someone
Right.
made.
That, well, yeah, both. Just the general problem is a problem. Yeah. Yeah. Unit bias is a huge problem too. I had a friend of mine that comes to our meetups. Like, he was complaining how his younger brother will never be able to stack a whole Bitcoin probably. And I was like, dude, there's no such thing as a whole Bitcoin. Like it's just units and is how many of them you have. Like, don't get distracted by this whole Bitcoin thing. It's just the way that websites price it. That's all it really is. It's just an arbitrary denomination. And this is, and as far as the bits thing, I think that probably on a longer timeline, people will eventually call Satoshi's bits. But what I didn't like about the bits kind of proposal is that they weren't calling Satoshi's bits. They were calling the third place bits, and they wanted two decimals after. And this to me is like super confusing. Now you want two decimal places in Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin doesn't actually have any decimals, it just makes no sense to me. I would just say let's just rip off the band-aid and go straight to the base unit because that's just sensible.
I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I understand why some people would want to have this exclusive club where you can say you have a whole Bitcoin if you put a lot of work into it or you're rich. But also, for the sake of adoption, it's useful to say, yeah, I have this many Bitcoin units. I have a girlfriend now, and it's pretty big news, but I set her up with a Lightning wallet, and she asked me, what's a SAT? I'm like, that's a Bitcoin unit. Why is it called a SAT and not Bitcoin? And for some reason, this made me super happy. It's exactly the process that I was describing, and people were saying, no, you're trolling because it's so easy. You have 100 million sats in a Bitcoin. It's not easy.
I don't think it will ever happen, but I almost think it would make more sense to what we currently call a Bitcoin to call that a Satoshi. It's like, I have one whole Satoshi. Like, I'm a Satoshi now. Like that to me sounds cooler and more fun than I have a whole Bitcoin. When like having half of a Bitcoin just makes you feel like a loser. Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't know what to say, but I do prefer Bitcoin as the unit. How many Bitcoins do you have? These Bitcoin units. Doesn't matter. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And like I said
But
before, there's just so many integers between the Bitcoin and the amount and the smaller amount that there's just actually no room for confusion. Like nobody's going to think you're sending them 20,000 Bitcoin when you're sending 20,000 sats. Like it's just not going to happen, you know?
that was a very good marketing move. I think a lot of people paid attention to that. And it was a good way to come out of that silence that took a few months. You said you were in this stealth mode. You came out of that with this proposal to change at first the Satoshi symbol, and then it turned out to be just the Bitcoin symbol.
We have a few more planned. I don't know if we'll be able to do it as cute every time, but I am happy with the way that campaign went. I do hope that it sparks something longer term, and we are moving forward with the plan either way. So, yeah, that was nice.
I feel like this is a bit late into the interview to ask you, but I do want to know. Because when you started Synonym, you said you wanted to do a better version of Google to revolutionize not just Bitcoin, but the entire internet. And you're talking about Web of Trust. Can you give a little bit of a spoiler on what you're up to?
Um, I'll say that's still the plan. I still think it's possible. I would say that killing Google these days doesn't seem like as big an accomplishment when it seems like AI is already doing that work in some ways. But that wasn't necessarily the aspect that we were trying to kill. And it was more, and I've said this in past interviews that I feel like Web of Trust and a more peer-to-peer based web, or particularly a key-based web, um, is the way to do that. And it's basically by putting the user in control of their feeds, of like the data they want to see, the provenance of the data they want to see. It's just like turning it, like one of the slogans that we'll say is "You are the algorithm." This is like one of the pitches for the next product that we're doing. Maybe even the tagline for it. So that's your spoiler: is "You are the algorithm." Rather than Google being the algorithm, or you having to trust.
Is this the first time you say this? Is this exclusive?
Yes.
Nice. So everyone who listened to this knows that the tagline is gonna be "You are the algorithm" for.
It might be. We'll certainly say that. I don't know if it will be the only one, but yeah.
Also, have to ask you about something else. You mentioned that your node does not validate Taproot transactions, and basically it operates as if Taproot never happened. And why is that?
Because I don't need Taproot, and I just want to be able to be that and say that to people so they think about why I might do something like that. Um, I didn't do it to be able to use it as a device to talk to people. I did it naturally. I just don't want to update it. Like, and I want to have that right. I want to have that power. I am told that I don't have that power, and that I actually take a risk by not fully validating um, the current soft fork and version of Bitcoin Core. But I run enough different, nodes, and have things diversified enough that it's not. I doubt that's ever going to affect me. But yeah, I think that soft forking is actually, I have a tweet about this. Maybe you can share it in the links or something if you find it. But like, I think that soft forks are actually oppressive, trusted, centralized, centrally driven, impossible to actually get consent for, and from users at least. And so I just feel like I don't, I never agreed to Taproot, and I'm not going to pretend that I did. And I'm not going to adopt this like culture of just always running the latest update from Bitcoin Core. Like, I'm not an engineer. I can't audit Bitcoin Core. I don't want to have to find people that I trust to do it every time there's an update. I think the pace of change is too high. I think the degree of risk taken in softworks is too high. And I just don't need to, it seems like Taproot's doing fine without me. And so I'm not going to support it because I don't need it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's interesting because the marketing, the brochure for soft forks has always been that they're opt-in, you know? If you don't like the soft fork, you can
Supposedly,
just
yeah.
not run that on your node. But when you don't do that, they say, well, you're not fully validating.
Yeah.
And you're running an old version, which is dangerous because this new
And as far as
version
I know, they
has.
don't upkeep old versions. You know, like it's like Windows has like a certain time of life for a version, right? And they will keep maintaining it until they officially stop maintaining it. Well, Bitcoin should be doing that like as far back as possible, right? Like I should be able to run a pre-SegWit node if I want to safely, you know, but they don't think of it that way. They think of it as like it's engineer driven. So engineers like love complexity. They love new problems. They love making new problems so they can have new opportunities. They see it as having new features and new possibilities. But I really think it's more that they're just looking for opportunities to express themselves. And through expressing themselves, they're incentivized to do so because they get more easily funded with grants and things like this. And so the incentives aren't very good for a culture of default installing the latest Bitcoin core. It's not very smart.
Yeah, now that I think about it, it's interesting. The easy reply for me to give you right now and get applauses and likes on Twitter and make a moment out of it would be to just tell you if you want it to get built, just fund it, you know? Just pay someone to maintain that version of the code and update it so that you can run pre-Taproot and pre-SegWit software without any security issues. But it's not that simple. And
No,
I
it's
think
not.
that soft forks at the end of the day are still forks. And the assumption is that at one point everyone in the network is going to upgrade to that soft fork and it becomes a hard fork.
Yeah, that's the problem is that assumption. And I'm just trying to be on the other side of that Overton window and just be like, no, that is not an assumption. Like, I'm not just going to agree with all this complexity. I'm just not going to do it. And if I lose money because of it, maybe that will be a good example, if anything. I doubt I will, but I don't know. I think the culture is very twisted and people are way too confident in their like mental model of how Bitcoin works, how soft forks work, how Bitcoin Core works. Everybody's way too optimistic and accepting and way too trusting.
But John, my t-shirt says don't trust verify. And so does my mug and so does my
That
hat.
doesn't even
I
mean
bought them from the
anything.
Blockstream store.
I've grown to hate that phrase, by the way. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, don't trust, verify. Like, trust is fucking very useful. You have to make sure people understand like the qualities of trust and when they should and when they should not and what they should trust certain people with and what they shouldn't trust them with. Like there's just so much nuance there and it just gets lost. And don't trust verify. Like don't trust verify, well then what the fuck is liquid? Like it doesn't even make sense. Even Bitcoin is trusted. Like everything is trusted.
But they're gonna twist that and say that it's about open source code. And you don't have to trust it because you can see the code and understand what it does. But do you
But I
have to trust
can't.
Greg Maxwell? They're gonna say, yes, of course you have to trust Greg Maxwell. What are you gonna do? Study computer science for 20 years and hope that you're gonna
Right.
be as smart as he is?
I don't even believe that core devs are qualified to audit all of the kind of permutations of a complex soft fork, or even if the fork itself might not be complex, but what it enables is new complexity. I don't think that like I think we're already past a point where an engineer can like confidently say this is safe. I think we're actually already past that point because when you do something like combine covenants with taproot leafs and have all these like unfurling structures within taproot and then unfurling covenant, you multiple UTXO sharing, like you just create all these things that you don't know how to measure or assess. And every time you add another one, it gets worse. It becomes like this like unsolvable mess. And that's not what I use Bitcoin for. Like I just want to be able to make transactions where I don't have to deal with censorship. Like it's it's not I don't want the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I understand your point. And that's very interesting. I contemplated on this issue a lot lately with the whole covenants discussion. because it seems like there's some political power that Blockstream has over the soft forks that we agree to activate. And it seems like the ones that get endorsed by Adam Back and Andrew Polstra and then Greg Maxwell on the mailing list, all of these have to be agreed on by them in order to be accepted. It seems like CTV, according to a lot of people I've asked, is more conservative than Upcat. But for the reason that CTV was not built by Blockstream, it seems like they try as hard as they can to marginalize Jeremy. And I do know that you have a different opinion of Jeremy and maybe you don't like him. But they're trying to basically portray him as a crazy guy so that the community loses trust in anything that he may create or may have created. And then they push Upcat and then they say, yeah, but this one was written by Satoshi and we have rewritten this entirely to neuter the cat to make it less potent. But you can do pretty much the same that CTV can do, but this is by us and that one is by Jeremy. So which one are you going to choose? I've had Andrew Polstra on the show on the same season, and he was very bullish on Upcat. He was saying, oh, it's just 15 lines of code. It's no big deal. We're gonna get that through.
Well, I have not witnessed this behavior from Blockstream, so I can't really comment confidently on it. I thought I was the only one, or at least I thought I was the first one, kind of pushing back against Jeremy's behavior specifically. It kind of got picked up by a few other people in the past year or so, but Jeremy also, at least temporarily, quit his effort for a while in order to let us have the bull market. And as far as Blockstream goes, I don't think they have as much weight as they used to. I think losing Greg Maxwell is part of that. And I think that if that's what Polster was portraying to you, I think he was speaking overconfidently. I don't think they have the power they used to. I think it'll be much more difficult to get Opcat in than they think. And I think that just a huge reason is just like nobody actually cares. Like it's only engineer driven. There aren't users saying that they want this, and the ones that are don't know what they're talking about. So it's just like it's just not important. Honestly, it just isn't.
Yeah, on the topic of scaling, you did mention that you would be in favor of a block size increase if it was a soft fork and it didn't make everyone abandon the old chain for the sake of adopting this new one with larger blocks. I think, and maybe you're gonna disagree with me, but that's fine. I think Litecoin did something interesting with the Mimblewimble extension blocks, where they increased the block size. They have that within the Litecoin core client. And on that extension block, which works just like a sidechain, but without the UX burdens of trying to peg in and peg out from a sidechain, it's just seamlessly integrated. They can send and receive coins from this confidential chain, which is an extension block. It works in parallel at the same time. And it's a pretty cool user experience. It's interesting for me that they were able to do that in the first place. And it's pretty interesting because they have scalable privacy with Mimblewimble. Of course, it's not as good as Monero or whatever, but it's pretty good. And it's also interesting that nobody in Bitcoin talks about this, and they ignored it. And so far, I think Litecoin has been sort of a test net for what can be added to Bitcoin at a later point in time. They were the first ones, not the first ones. I think there was Grossel Coin or whatever that did SegWit. And they were the first ones to do a Lightning transaction from an on-chain channel. So that was interesting.
Well, I don't know enough about the design or the implementation of it in Litecoin to say, but my guess is there was a little while where it did really look like Litecoin was going to be the test bed for things that would get added to Bitcoin later. I remember when the Mimblewimble paper was dropped. My guess is that people at Litecoin got the sense that this was definitely going to end up on Bitcoin if it could. And so they added it with maybe more confidence than they should have, because it obviously has not ended up in Bitcoin. And that's not, so that doesn't really make it a test net Bitcoin thing if Bitcoin hasn't added it. And it doesn't even seem to be on the docket of people wanting to add it. So my guess is there's some design reason for that. I don't know enough about the design to say, but I'll infer ignorantly a little bit from what you said, which is there's definitely going to be complexities and risks and trade-offs to having Bitcoin support an additional asset inherently. And that's what it kind of sounds like. But then again, maybe that's unavoidable as a way to soft fork block size. I don't know. I'm familiar with extensions blocks being brought up in the past, elastic blocks. There's probably some way that Luke could invent that we don't know about. And I would like to know what I think is the best proposal, but I don't because there's just no work being done on it, right? So if there were active proposals about ways to support more transactions on chain, I would be interested and I would be researched on them and I would care. But I'm not going to waste my time like becoming a Mimblewimble expert, an Elastic Blocks expert, etc., because nobody is actually working on it, and I'm not going to work on it. So what's the point? Yeah, I think it's interesting if it's interesting, but I'm not incentivized to find out. You know.
Yeah, so John, this is nerd talk, you know? Maybe it's not necessary. Today we just had an all-time high for Bitcoin. We're
Yeah.
in the middle of a bull market, apparently. We're so back, everyone is enthusiastic, and we went up almost, no, it's more than 2x since November of 2023. It's pretty incredible. So, of course, I'm gonna ask you this. What's your prediction for this bull market? Any prediction. It doesn't have to be price, just some random event happening.
Um, I'll say I think that I'll be disappointed if the top is only 150K. I would like to see a much higher top than that. But I think that 150K within the next year, roughly, maybe a little more. Um, I think it's pretty likely. And that's how I'm looking at things. Other predictions, I don't know, man. uh, Next bear market, I think that we'll see the vast or drastic decrease in interest in ordinals, or at least the NFT aspects of them. Maybe it'll evolve to something else like shitcoins do. I don't know, but I do think it's a trend. Um, yeah, I don't really know what other predictions I would have. I'm just trying to be able to ship our stuff before it ends so we can try to get a little increased exposure for the next bear market before the next bear market. And that's really what I care about most. I'd also like to sell enough Bitcoin near the top to be able to have a down payment on a house so I can stop renting. But I don't really have predictions other than some guesses on price. There will
Oh
be
my
no
god,
soft
John.
fork. There will be no soft fork.
You were so blasphemous there. You're gonna sell your Bitcoin at the top. Oh my god, you're not a real Bitcoiner. You're supposed to die with your Bitcoin, as Michael Saylor says.
Yeah, you
He
never
actually
sell your
said that.
Bitcoin. I know. I tweeted a whole rant about it. People attacked the shit out of me. Yeah, I was like, I said something like, I quoted that tweet. You never sell your Bitcoin. He said this like a week or two ago, and I said, this is not a good look from someone that owns billions of dollars in Bitcoin. Like, it's just, and people just didn't get it. They didn't understand why somebody should be hesitant to trust someone that tells you not to sell your Bitcoin when it is like the hugest bet of their life. Like, people are just dumb. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and
Sell your
they're not
Bitcoin when you
listening
want.
to this show, fortunately.
Yeah, I think I said this when we were off air, so I'll say it again. You sell your Bitcoin whenever the hell you want, man. Like, it's your Bitcoin. That's what's cool about it, is you can do whatever the hell you want with it whenever you want. But just as far as like financial advice, just try to have your base requirement be not to own more Bitcoin than you need to sell in the next bull market. You know what I mean? You have to be able to weather 2 to 4 years at least, because you might buy the wrong time, your timing might be bad, and you don't want to have to sell the bottom. That's all. But you know what? If you go through enough of these cycles, the bottom is already the top for you. You know what I mean? Like, if you paid, $600 for your Bitcoin and you sell at 15K, yeah, your timing wasn't so great, but you still like did great, And so you have to spend money, if especially if all you own is Bitcoin. All you ever do is sell Bitcoin. And so it's just a nonsense thing to tell people to hold forever. It's a nonsense thing to have your idols telling you to never sell. Like, oh, that's a spicy prediction. MicroStrategy will sell some Bitcoin in some way, whether, indirectly or directly, within the next year and a half.
Wow, let me tweet this out. MicroStrategy will sell some of its Bitcoin within the next year and a half. That's gonna be such a letdown. All this cult that was built around Michael Saylor. Oh, this guy never sells. This guy is such a bull. There's even a song about that. It's gonna
Maybe they'll be
be
thanking me for
interesting.
mentally preparing them, because this is an inevitability. Like, the company has a duty to its shareholders. Companies are not supposed to be hoarding resources; they're supposed to be deploying them. Companies are not supposed to act as proxy investments for, commodities. Like, this can't sustain. Eventually he's going to like have to answer to his board. Like, if it goes from like 250K to 100K, that's going to be the second time they watch them leave major profits on the table. That's not acceptable. Like, they have to at least try to realize some gains and deploy those gains, not just profit.
Yeah, it's funny. It's gonna be super interesting when the narrative breaks and people are gonna turn on Michael Saylor or not because he
He
built a
already
cult.
sells master shares. He already sells them. He sold them like 2 days before he made that tweet. Like, it's nonsense.
And then this was not on my bingo card, but Bitcoiners are buying MicroStrategy shares and they're flexing it, saying, "Yeah, look at these gains." I'm like, why are you even here, man? Like,
Yeah, I have a tweet that says this too. It said, tweeting about your master gains is not the flex you think it is, or something like this. Yeah, I agree.
I don't call it master. I think master sounds too nice. MicroStrategy.
Well, the ticker is MSTR. That's why.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it master because they're not worthy of it. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna say something very blasphemous right now. I would rather see people post about shitcoins, and I have more respect for shitcoiners than I have for people investing in stock market and ETF funds. Okay, kill me now.
I could rationalize that. I could say I have more respect for people that are sincere, whether it be through ignorance or rationale. Yeah, I would agree on that level. I just think a lot of the people that do that are actually doing it through ignorance and greed and the same reasons that Sailor is probably doing it. So I don't know. Like, I want to respect Sailor because he is obviously maneuvering the market and doing well in his maneuver, and I don't want to pretend that's not true. But I also think that like people need to just be really careful with idolizing people. It's not a good idea.
Yep. It's gonna be super interesting when the narrative breaks. I'm waiting for that. Oh, I have my. Actually, I
He'll
have
have a
water
counter
right now.
narrative, man. He'll be like, "We sold blah 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 Bitcoin, and we have started a new Bitcoin research company." Like, he'll find some way, but the fact is, not fact, but the inevitability is he has to realize gains and he has to deploy gains if he's running a company. Like, the company is meant to grow, and if he can't grow the company, he should be dispersing the gains as dividends, and eventually that's going to catch up with him. Maybe not in the next year and a half, but I just my prediction there is just mostly based on his board and his shareholders already had to watch him leave money on the table before. I don't think they're going to tolerate it again.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, John, something which I respect a lot in this space is consistency over the years. I've told Andreas Antonopoulos when I met him last year in Prague that I have a lot of respect for him. I don't care that he wrote the book about Ethereum because he was never the hardcore Bitcoin maximalist as the culture evolved. He was always constant about his views. He was talking about Litecoin in 2013. He can still talk about Litecoin today. He's a technologist from this point of view. So it's hard for me to crucify him for doing something which is consistent to his views. he was always like this. It's just that people expected him to evolve in a certain way towards a certain direction, and he hasn't. So that's why I think some Bitcoiners canceled him. And I also respect Eric Voorhees because his objective was always to subvert the state, and he comes from this libertarian background. He doesn't care if he uses Bitcoin or he uses something else, as long as he avoids taxes or whatever, and he finds a libertarian justification for it, he's gonna do it. I think I respect that much more than having, I guess, layers for shitcoinery, where LBTC, Bitcoin on Liquid, is fine, but WBTC is not fine. I don't know. There are steps in here which are more dogmatic than they are technical. And also have respect for you because you're consistent in. So I remember when you did the interview with Roger Ver in 2017, you mentioned how you made some efforts to upgrade your nodes and you're always a few versions behind the latest release of Bitcoin Core. You actually said this, and today you're doing the same with Taproot. So you're maintaining your philosophy on how to approach Bitcoin. And I don't feel like you sold out, even though you are in a much better financial position right now. And I guess you have more freedom. You're not silencing yourself because there are people in the space who make a lot of money and then they go quiet and they never criticize anything else. They try to be friends with everyone. I get the feeling that you're the same John that I interviewed 5 years ago for the first time. It was my second ever Bitcoin Takeover podcast episode. And you're all out. You're punching left and right. And you're not afraid to take stances and express opinions. And I like that.
Well, thank you, Vlad. I appreciate that. And I'll tell you what I tell other people who take the time to say things like that to me, which is um, the amount of people that say those kind of things to me is probably 1 in 20. And the rest of them are that say things to me about what I do. Um, the rest of them are trying to drag me down and get me to stop being this way. And the truth is, I just can't help it. It's not an intentional thing. I am who I am, and I do my best to be real. I'm not perfect at it. Nobody is. And when people say things like that to me, what it does is it helps me stay sane because I'm just like, okay, like that's a reminder you're not as crazy as everybody's trying to make you feel all the time. And the truth is I really do feel crazy a lot of the time because people are always trying to like gaslight what just seems totally rational. And when something just makes a lot of sense to you and people are gaslighting you, it's very difficult. It's really difficult. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I'll add I wouldn't agree with you on the other examples as much. Maybe this sounds arrogant. That's not my intention. So much as when I think about those people, I would have to use a healthy amount of nuance to get to the uh, judgments that you did, the positive judgments. Like, I just can't speak that way about Eric Voorhees. I understand what you're trying to say, and I understand that he does try to portray that. I just don't agree with your assessment there. And then with Antonopoulos, I think there's a whole other aspect to him that's not being mentioned, which is why he ended up ostracized. And it's not just that he did Ethereum stuff; it's that one, some of that stuff was actually contradictory to some of his Bitcoin arguments, and so there was some logical inconsistency. And two, he was very I don't know what the word is, like intolerant of people actually trying to disagree with him, whether they did it nicely or not, but rationally. And so he's like definitely a blocker. He'll just block you for just disagreeing at all. You can't really like help him because he's already like better than you, and that's something I don't really appreciate. So maybe I can look that way to people too. I don't know, but I do try to be reasonable, even if I don't seem that way.
Yeah, I guess I don't know these two people as well as you do. You have been a
I
lot
don't either,
around for
man. Like
longer.
my knowledge of them is many years old. They might be better or worse now. I don't know. But as far as I know, Eric Voorhees is still getting in trouble with the authorities for doing things he knew were illegal and knew would get caught by the authorities. So I don't know that he's learning any lessons. I think he's just trying to make money shitcoining.
Well, my understanding is that he is at least being consistent as opposed to these moving goalposts. For example, I'm gonna rant here, but in the case of Lightning, it started from we're all gonna be our own servers, and this is web free, this is whatever. We're gonna have our own Lightning
I
channels,
forgot
and
about
we're
the web
going
on
to.
Lightning. Jesus. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, that was a big deal at the time, and
Yeah.
we're gonna run everything on Raspberry Pi just to flex, because it's an affordable, low-powered hardware. And then it moved to, yeah, this doesn't work. How about we use Wallet of Satoshi sometimes because this one has better routing rates, it doesn't fail payments. It's fine with small amounts. And then it moved into how about we don't run any nodes at all and we let professionals do this, and then we fall back on LSPs. And I was not even aware of the term LSP until like 2 years ago, Lightning Service Provider. And then we got services like Phoenix, which has been doing this for the longest time, but I wasn't aware of it. There was Breeze, and there's also Blixt, and I'm not sure if Synonym has something similar. You did say that you have something similar, but you limited the capacity of channels. And there's also
So do
something
they.
by
They all do.
Bitrefill, which is called Tor or something,
That
THOR.
doesn't exist anymore. But
Oh
yeah,
no.
they
Anyway,
they were the first LSP, and I was at Bitrefill when we were trying to make that a thing. But since I've left, I think all the services for that have closed.
we went from running our own hardware and software and becoming sovereign to falling back to Uncle Jim. And now the Uncle Jim narrative is very powerful to the point where we have eCash mints where you can't verify the supply and you're receiving some amount and you don't know if it's real or not, but you have the benefit of privacy. I don't know. It's very strange for me to recognize the culture anymore.
Yeah, I think that some of it is driven by investment, and some of it is driven again by engineers liking new things, the shiny thing. And when people see like companies raising millions of dollars to do eCash projects, they think, oh well, that's where it's at, whether it's subconscious or conscious, and it becomes part of the culture for a while. I do think it's a trend. Yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah, it's a valid observation, but it's better to be evolving than to not be. uh, at least everybody's trying new things. If I want to be positive, at least we're not trying to do the same old narratives. At least, but a lot of it is just narratives.
You got a quick reply on Twitter, and I think it's worth reading just for the laughs. So he said his name is Vox Populi, Popoli, and he said, but John, he is the board. He owns majority ownership stake. He is no longer CEO, just chairman of board. He can tolerate himself. This comes from this guy who talks about your previous Michael Saylor argument.
He still has shareholders. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be totally savvy on the dynamics of the company so much as if I were him, I would do that too. That's what I'm trying to say. Is if I were him, I would sell some within the next year and a half, and I would have no qualms about it.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. There's so much hopium floating around, and people are going to be so disappointed. But it's fine. It's
Well,
part of the
don't
learning
don't
curve.
sound too evil, Vlad. Like it's gonna be so fun. People will be so disappointed. Like I don't
No,
want
this is
people
how
to
you
feel
learn. I'm
bad.
sorry. This is how I learned. I got
I
wrecked. I had
guess
to get wrecked. I had to
maybe.
have some
I
idols
like
and
to
then
believe,
realize,
though. I like to believe that we can learn from other people's mistakes. I have to believe that. I don't know why, but at the top of my head, but I do have to believe that.
aren't you at a point where every cycle looks exactly the same and just as dumb? You also mentioned
Uh,
that you,
it's
you want
getting
to sell
worse.
at the top of the market and you expect the next bear market, and people already talk about the super cycle again. They're like, yeah, of course, Wall Street, ETFs, they're gonna sell, they're gonna have billions
Hey,
of dollars
I would
volume
love for
every
it to
day,
happen. I would love to be
and we're never
wrong
going
about
back.
a super cycle. Like I'm not gonna cry about that. I didn't say I'm gonna sell all my Bitcoin. I specifically said, look, I have a savings, and when you save something, it's because you have a goal, right? You want to do something with your savings. It can be pay for your future kids' college or whatever it is. You have a goal. All right, my goal is I want to own a house again. I've had one in the past. I don't have one now. I've been renting for a long time. I think it was the right financial decision to be able to hold more Bitcoin. But now I feel like, okay, like I want to figure out what a down payment would cost on a house that I want. And I want to borrow money, borrow fiat. So my fiat becomes my debt becomes lower over time. Like this is all very rational stuff. Like I want to deploy some of my savings to achieve a goal. Like it shouldn't be crazy. It should be how everybody thinks. I don't know. And yes, I think selling the top is a little bit of a nonsense comment because obviously picking the top is nearly impossible. But I can DC out instead of DCA. You know what I mean? I can be like, okay, for Q4 to Q1, 24 and 25, I'm going to sell this much every week, and until I have enough to buy a house, like or down payment on a house. That's a plan, and I challenge anybody to tell me I'm stupid for that because I don't think there's any argument.
Houses are shitcoin. That's the argument. Anyway, you destroyed my follow-up question. I was gonna ask you what's your top signal, but you said you were gonna DC out.
So the top signal, I did call the last top, and I called it in person with witnesses, because it was just so obvious at the time. The signal to look for is just elation, and it will just be everywhere. It'll be like everybody's getting a Lambo, NFTs
a Supra,
of the future.
Not a Lambo, a Supra.
Everybody's getting a Supra, a souped up Supra. You can just see it all around you. Everybody's telling their family about Bitcoin and how much money they made. Like you're telling loved ones. Telling loved ones is a great sign. I call it the wife indicator. I probably said this in a past episode. But the wife indicator is just like when you're telling a loved one who's not involved in Bitcoin about how happy you are about your Bitcoin investment, it's probably a top signal, or at least a local top. And yeah, I just think that you will see elation. You will see people saying the dumbest things. You will see people that you didn't expect to say dumb things, saying dumb things. You will see people that are just basically probably going to be poor for the rest of their life, think that they're not going to be because of this, what's coming next. Like you just can see it everywhere. Just idiocy, elation. It'll just smack you in the face if you're looking for it.
Do you know about the Supra cycle, John?
The Supra cycle?
Supra cycle, yes.
No, I don't know about this.
Oh no. Oh no, I have to send that to you. Are you on Telegram right now? I have to show you this. Okay. You have to see it. It's incredible. It's super cycle on steroids. This is the super cycle.
Gets a Supra
and the girlfriend
gets a Supra, and let's see. Okay. Bullshit narratives that failed. S2F super cycle. Have some fun staying poor. This is where institutions dumped on you. Okay. GR Supra phase. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Supra. How much is a Supra going for?
65,000 in Romania. It's like 50 in the US. I don't get why, but whatever.
Well, probably because taxes and shipping costs. But yeah. August 22. Supra MK4 phase. I didn't even know there were all these Supras. 1 Bitcoin equals. What's a Supra RZ worth?
It's more than 100K right now.
Damn.
And you know why? Because of that movie, The Fast and the Furious.
Any Supra equals 1 girlfriend. So does 2 Supras equal two girlfriends?
That's up to you to figure out. But you only have one other seat in your Supra. You can't have 2 girlfriends at the same time.
Okay, I understand.
But of course, there's that story that if you already have a girlfriend, she gets a girlfriend, and you have to deal with that.
Okay. I don't think there's going to be any Supras in my future, but I will definitely let you know if it happens.
I mean, the rationale behind the Supra is that it's the plebs Lambo. And I know you disagree with the pleb stuff. Maybe you should mention it. But basically, most of us will never afford a Lambo. And anyway, if we had the money for a Lambo, why would you buy a Lambo in the first place? It's stupid. It breaks down easily. You want something that gives you the same feeling of speed at about 10% of the price, and that's the Supra. It gives you 90% of the experience of a Lambo, but it's a Toyota. It doesn't break so
I
easily.
don't like owning cars. Like you notice, I said I was going to buy a house. I don't own a car, and I didn't say I'm going to buy a car at the top. Like I could buy a car instead or get a loan for a car, but I hate owning cars. And the last thing I want is a high maintenance car. I'd rather have a driver than a car. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for you. And I guess you already have apps for that. You don't have to pay a full-time driver. You just pay something when you use it.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pay taxes for parking and maintenance or whatever.
And I think it's just going to get worse for car owners too, because they're going to try to like force things like electric vehicles, and that'll come with more regulations and more fees. And then now you're competing with all the people buying vehicles for Uber and things like this, and every regulations that are going to come with that. And it's just going to get more and more annoying until I don't know what. But hopefully, I'll still have the freedom to take a car wherever I want, and that won't go away before I die.
Yeah, but by year 2030, you're gonna own nothing and you'll be happy, right? That's the
Yeah.
WEF World Economic Forum agenda, which, by the way, right now praises Bitcoin mining. Did you see
I
that
saw
coming?
that. I did. I did. That's interesting. I don't know what's going on there. I guess now that BlackRock is in, it's pump the bags. I look very much forward to watching. You think the disappointment of Sailor saying selling will be bad? Wait till we start having market manipulation from Wall Street. Like they're not going to be any different. Like the problem used to be like China banning Bitcoin. It'll just be like the US banning exchanges or something. Like it'll just be the same shit recycled every cycle, and they're going to dump their bags on us, and people are going to cry, and everybody that leveraged is going to get wiped out. And unfortunately, I don't know how long it will take people to learn the lesson, but there's still a lot of learning to do.
It's still the early days, right?
Yeah, you're still early. Man, I
I,
fucking
I
hate
I
Bitcoin
think I
memes.
tweeted this that I consider everyone who bought Bitcoin before the ETF an OG, and whatever happens after the ETF is the mainstream financial phase of Bitcoin. And I don't think anyone is OG past this point.
I like that, even though it discounts the degree of OG that me or people even longer than me are. I think I'm okay with that because it's a nice little snapshot moment. Like it's like okay, like if you didn't buy till the ETF, like you definitely weren't. You're a whole other section, a whole other class. You know.
You did tell me at one point that you disagree with the whole pleb label and the fact that people call themselves plebs and they act as plebs, and I think that's what you don't like. Can
Yeah,
you tell me
it's
again?
similar. I also don't like black people calling themselves the N word. It's for the same reasons. I think that it puts a cloud over your head, and it's not basically it's not aspirational. Like you can try to take the word back, or you can try to redefine the word to mean something proud, but in the end, the word is the word, and you can't remove what the word actually represents and what it's originally intended to represent. And you always kind of are including that, and it's poisoning any intention, any good intention you have. And so, I just don't think you should. I don't think calling yourself a pleb is cool. I think it's defeatist. I think it's pessimistic. I think it's just not aspirational. People that aspire would never call themselves a pleb. I understand that there's rationale for doing it to be humble and things like this, but we have other words. Like you don't have to have use ones that mean that. Like you can just say stay humble and stack sats. Like you don't have to be a pleb. I just don't like it. I like people always trying to reach their ubermensch, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then you have people who create this class system and they say, I'm gonna build a Bitcoin citadel. And if you have more than 10 Bitcoins, you're gonna be like a king. If you have more than one Bitcoin, you're gonna be a nobleman. And if you have anything below that, you're gonna be a humble servant.
I mean, you don't have to say those things for them to be true. Like, yes, there is a ladder, and people are on different rungs of the ladder. But that I don't like the idea of that. That has to mean that there's actually a second class. You know what I mean? Like, I think it should be a spectrum, and yes, I think it's competitive, and I love competition. I think it's important. But this, I don't know. People need to think more clearly and be more critical. And I don't know, not such idiots and not so lazy and so scared.
Yeah, the distinction that I make is that in sociology you have two big schools of thought. You actually have three, but I'm not going to mention the third one. You have the Marxist one, which is always about money and capital, and it's materialistic. And it says that the world is ran by money and it's the capital that controls the world. And as long as you have the money, you can do whatever you want. And then there is the Max Weber school of thought. Max Weber was this German, actually, they were all German. They invented this. I wouldn't call it science, it's just field of study. But they invented this, and Max Weber said that it's all about the ideas. And in his thesis, he presented the case of China, which for the longest time has been the most developed nation in the world and more civilized and more technologically advanced than the West. But somehow you had the Industrial Revolution that happened in England as opposed to China. So he tried to explain to himself why. And he came up with this theory that it was the Protestant work ethic that lifted people and made them work more and become more productive. But ultimately, it comes down to ideas and coming up with an idea and having the work ethic to build it. And if you think about it, maybe you have Bitcoin whales today. It doesn't mean that they will always be Bitcoin whales. It doesn't mean that whoever will inherit these Bitcoin is going to be just as frugal with their holdings. There's always this, in finance and money systems, there's always this change that happens, and it's natural. It's part of capitalism, where the former rich lose their wealth and there's a new class of rich. And I think it's going to happen pretty fast in Bitcoin as new ideas come along, and maybe OGs, the way that people like yourself are defining them, are going to be investing their Bitcoin in other ideas and companies, and maybe some are going to be super successful and others are going to fail. I think this is going to be an important factor. But ultimately, if you're coming up with a brilliant idea, I think you can get to 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin in no time. For example, the mempool.space people, I'm pretty sure they got pretty rich by now. And they're gonna keep on getting rich as long as they add features that people want and they're ahead of the curve.
No Bitcoin startup is getting rich unless they're an exchange. And even those, like the ones that only sell Bitcoin, most of those aren't getting rich either as far as startups go. So don't assume. I mean, I don't know their finances, but I would never be assuming that mempool is getting rich. Their ability to make money is very difficult as far as I understand their business models. Doesn't mean they have no business models, but I don't think that these guys are laughing their way to the bank with hundreds of Bitcoin because of this endeavor. That doesn't mean you're wrong. I just that example requires some maybe pushback. I do think, yeah, you can make a lot of money. You can gather a lot of resources if you solve problems at scale, right? And so if you provide a product or service to people at some kind of scale, you can make lots of money, and that will probably always be true, unless AI really does cause dystopia people are scared of, which I doubt as well. Yeah, I don't know about all those philosophies that you were mentioning with, Max Weber and how these things are, whether they're capitalism or what they are. I'll mention that I feel like both of those seem to lack an acknowledgement of how violence plays a role in structuring society. That's one thing that I think about a lot when I try to think about what Bitcoin actually fixes and what it doesn't, and what is wrong with society and how it might be addressed. And I always kind of hit a really big wall when you like just realize that like most of the time two men can outnumber one man, and that just the physical dynamics of having a tribe that's willing to commit violence with you, that's just always going to be true, I think. So what do you do about that, and how do you structure society when that's true? I have a feeling what the best guess is, well, you're looking at it like we have evolved society over thousands of years, and this is what worked, and maybe it won't be what always works, but I think it will always be a echo of what we have today. And so I don't think Bitcoin like fixes government or fixes violence and these kinds of things. Anyway, I have to get going soon. Do you have
Yeah, this
final
this
questions
this
for
was
me?
beautiful for two reasons. Let me tell you why, and then you can go. First of all, you iterated the argument that DeRose was making when he was debating Saifedean like 6 or 7 years ago, and that was fun. It it was like a deja vu for me. And secondly, I tried to make it aspirational. Maybe they don't have hundreds of bitcoins. Maybe I'm wrong, but just the idea that you can come up with something better and you can still make a lot of bitcoin. That's what I was trying to say. And then you took it down, you know. You basically brought it to the ground. You made it rational and you said no, it's not like that because their business model is like this. That's so you. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. It was more fun than I thought it would be. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a compliment. And I appreciate it. And we should do this more than every 4 years.
Yes, sir. Have a nice evening.
You too,
Enjoy the
man.
all
Thank
time
you.
high.
I will. You too.